Hello, you're listening to Count Richard Von Coudenhove Kalergi. Today is Sunday, the 26th of January, and I'm just making this video here because I saw a tweet put out by Declan Ganley, and I kind of felt compelled to do a little recording on this. Now, this is an app I found called windy.com, and I have to say I found it very interesting with the wind speeds and wind directions and gust of wind. And I came across this the other night on the Friday night throughout the storm. But interesting to note that the highest recorded speed was 133 miles an hour, which is I think 2 miles an hour above the previous record, which had stood since 1945. But I suppose I'd like to get on to this particular tweet that was put out by Declan Ganley and talk more about that. That's just a little note there on the wind speed recorded there. Now, this is the tweet here. They are saying that power won't be restored to my area in County Galway until the 5th of February. There are people in the cold because they have listened to the thundering morons telling them that they can't cut and burn turf. There are houses built now in rural Ireland with no solid fuel burning ability, and that needs electrical power to operate all sorts of systems. Before I ever hear an Irish politician talking about reducing availability of cheap liquid or solid fuels again, plus the things that operate with them, they should be forced to spend from now until the 5th of February in a modern house without power in my area, and see below. I totally agree with Mr. Ganley here, and it's something I've been saying myself for years about this push towards renewable energy as a primary source of fuel rather than a secondary. Personally, I think it's all nonsense. And in fact, I was talking to a gentleman earlier on today who had a relative out in Galway whose roof and all the solar panels that were on it were taken off by a gust of wind. So this nonsense of we're in a country that is cold and damp for at least 6 months of the year, and telling people that they can't burn stuff in a fireplace, and this idea of building new houses without chimneys is to me complete nonsense. And I hope they'll have a rethink of this, and I believe there's up to 1 million houses were without electricity. Now, what percentage of that is the homes in Ireland without electricity is a staggering figure. Now, I'm sure the ESB are working around the clock trying to rectify this with fallen branches and wires, and it's to be expected. But an extraordinary amount of homes without electricity, and I couldn't agree strongly enough about what Mr. Ganley has to say here. This has to be one of my favourite pictures I've seen over the last couple of days. Believed to be somewhere out in Galway. Now, it's interesting to note this Lockheed P3 Orion, owned by I think it's NASA, came over to do a study on the barometer readings. This aircraft was also used in maritime patrols. Submarine warfare was based on the Lockheed Electra passenger aircraft. And this aircraft came in from Halifax to Shannon, taking a curved route. I have to say, Flight Radar is fascinating for all the that was a very quick jump there. And let's see, did he do any other circuits around? No, pretty straightforward. And then back into Shannon. And then on Thursday flew from Shannon down to Bilbao, which appears to still be there now at the moment. And lovely aircraft. I remember years ago as a child, there used to be a company, I think it was based in the UK, that used to fly I think newspapers, the English editions of newspapers in to Ireland in the hours of the morning. A lovely sound off the engines. And then the return journey back to Air Atlantic. That was the company. And they had a couple of DC-3s they used to fly as well for cargo. And I think he does do a little bit of it. Couple of trips around here. Here we go. Before eventually, and that was on the Friday. So now we're supposed to add, I came across this recently, and it is actually the front cover of the Radio Times from the 20th, the week of the 20th of November 1974. Now I actually remember this as a child, and it actually frightened me. Now this was actually a 2-hour documentary broadcast on the Wednesday of that week on BBC Two, and it was called The Weather Machine. And it was a public service broadcast, and based on what they believe to be the current modelling that an ice age was going to happen. And would you believe or not, there was a book written about this documentary called The Weather Machine, written by a man called Nigel Calder. And I actually have a copy of that book. It was published by the BBC in 1975. And I have a copy of that book, and I got it on Amazon. And there's a copy of the book there, The Weather Machine and the Threat of Ice. And a very nice book it is too. And you can still get copies of it for less than £5. And there's only one review, unfortunately. And it says here, interesting book when you compare it with today's statements about global warming. Now, on the 28th of April, 1975, Newsweek ran an article on what they believe was to be a cooling world. So, and they have the maps and charts to back up what they believe were the current trends at that time. And I have a copy of that article as well. Now, isn't that something? And in 1978, Leonard Nimoy did an excellent documentary on what they expected was an incoming ice age. You can actually get that on YouTube. And also, to go back to Nigel Calder's documentary, The Weather Machine, there is about half an hour of that is available. You can get that on YouTube. Not the full 2 hours, but the first half hour of it. Now here's a graph from the CO2 Coalition. I have to say, do fantastic work regarding CO2, and that CO2 not being a pollutant, but the gas of life. Now this graph here is a breakdown of CO2 levels from what we are in now, which is effectively CO2 starvation. And if you go to previous periods, such as the Jurassic period there, you were looking at over 2,000 parts per million, and the Cambrian period close to above 6,000 parts per million. So it goes to show then that CO2 is actually the gas of life. And in fact, the optimum level for plants is up to 1,400 parts per million. And that's why it is pumped into industrial greenhouses. Now, I was at a meeting in the Dropping Well pub where Éowyn Ryan was there, would have been last year, along with one of his councillors, a councillor, Claire Byrne. And during the question and answer session, I raised that question with him. What is the percentage of CO2 in the atmosphere, and how much of it is man-made? And he refused to answer my question, but babbled on about it being 440 parts per million, which it is true, which, as I say, is at historically low levels. And when I gently asked him a second time, with respect, Minister, you still haven't answered my question, the crowd became very agitated and angry towards me questioning him. I suspect he knew the answer, but didn't want to say it, because how do you equate that if man's CO2 contribution is only 3% of that, what effect is the 97% that is naturally occurring in nature having to affect that change? And here's another graph there produced by the CO2 Coalition regarding temperatures and CO2. And interestingly, most CO2 was actually contained in the ocean, and it is an increase in heat that actually releases the CO2, not the other way around. And there is a lagging period of up to 800 years. It's a bit like if you put a pot of water into an oven and you bring it to the boil. When you open up the door of the oven, the heat will be released, but the heat is still trapped in the water in the pot. And I suppose to read, I'd like to add this cover from Time magazine, which I think was around 2002. And it's interesting to note that the polar bear, it doesn't seem to be the symbol of Arctic melting anymore, because the polar bear obviously didn't read the script, and population of polar bears actually went up instead of down. So that was an inconvenient truth, that numbers, I think, are anywhere in around between 30 and 40,000 at the moment. Amazing, isn't it? And just in case, if you're wondering why I'm up at 2:20 in the morning, I'm trying to figure out whether I have amnesia or insomnia. So I'll say good night, good luck, and God bless. And please keep sharing the facts on what CO2 is. It's not a pollutant. It is the gas of life. And as an example, if you look at submarines, which can be at sea, nuclear submarines can be at sea for years, the sailors and submariners are allowed to breathe anywhere up to 5,000 parts per million. So how come none of them have taken a case against their navies for having them work in a hazardous environment? Good morning, good luck, and God bless.